For the longest of times, psychology as a field has been concerned with the understanding and treatment of mental illnesses. Sigmund Freud, perhaps the most infamous and influential figure in psychology, dedicated his life and work to developing the field of psychoanalysis. His interests and focus lied in pathology and its treatments. And while he certainly did care for his patients, he actually had very little to say regarding matters of psychological health. And indeed, it's only been rather recently that psychology as a discipline has started acknowledging and studying a capacity for mental health and well-being as compared to mental illness. And while the treatment of mental illnesses is certainly important, in focusing our attention to merely the negative aspects of mental life, we've again neglected to focus on upholding the more positive aspects. It's here that I'd like to start the episode with an apology. Our first two episodes have focused largely on mental illness, much like psychology has, historically speaking. And while I believe that's an important topic to discuss, and it's something of personal interest to me, I don't think it paints a full picture of mental health. And I never meant for this podcast to merely talk about mental illness. It's called the good mental life, not the illness-free mental life. Today we'll be discussing the concept of health and well-being. Stick around for a scientifically validated exercise to help in mental well-being. I briefly mentioned in our first episode that health was not merely the absence of sickness, but also the promotion of well-being. Let's take the time to process that some more. Well-being and its definitions can get pretty broad and vague, but generally, it's perceived as the presence of positive emotion as well as the absence of negative emotion. Now, it's important to note that this doesn't mean that one should feel nothing but positive emotions at all times. In fact, it would be more unnatural to feel positive emotions in distressing events. It wouldn't be normal to be happy or cheerful in the event of a funeral, for example. The key thing here would be that no unnecessary negative emotions come up too often. Now, you see, for the longest time, well-being wasn't the thing that was being pushed for in psychology. Earlier schools of thought, such as the psychoanalysts as well as the behaviorists, didn't say much about well-being, instead pushing for the absence of illness. The working models that came from these schools of thought weren't designed for well-being. And while the absence of illness is certainly a part of well-being, there's nothing inherently positive about it. To use a gardening analogy, you're just pulling out the pesky weeds from your garden. You're not planting any good seeds. That was what psychology as a field was like. A somewhat competent weed killer, but with no good things to show. It was this growing imbalance in psychology that led to the creation of humanistic psychology. Humanistic psychology, pioneered by figures like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, looked to gain a more holistic understanding of our mental lives and focused on not just our shortcomings and our illnesses, but our strengths, our goals, our passions, our talents, and many more. It gave psychology some much-needed balance in terms of mental health. Maslow himself said, "It is as if Freud supplied us the sick half of psychology, and we must now fill it out with the healthy half." While all these previous schools of thoughts were still influential in their own right, it was this humanistic movement that really got psychology as a field to consider and acknowledge the positive aspects of our mental life. Now, for those of you who stuck around, I'll deliver on my little promise I made in the beginning. I promised a scientifically validated exercise to help with well-being. This little exercise comes from the field of positive psychology, a field that builds on the humanistic movement. It's been scientifically validated across many people and across many cultures. I've tried it myself, and I can personally vouch for it. There's really no downsides to doing it, and I wouldn't be recommending it if I didn't believe in it. The best part is, it's really simple and easy to do. It's called the 3 blessings exercise. Here goes. Every night, before you go to bed, write down 3 things that went well that day, as well as why they went well. Try it for a week. You can write it on paper or type it on any device, but don't just think about it in your head. And they don't have to be majorly huge or important events. It could be anything as simple as a nice meal or a pleasant conversation with someone. But most importantly, pay attention to why it happened, to what caused it. Did you cause it? Or did something else cause it that was out of your control? That's okay too. And that's really all there is to it. In studies about this method, researchers found that participants continued doing this exercise months after the study was completed. It's not hard and it's quite fun to do, and so it can become a habit pretty quickly. I myself wasn't really expecting much from this exercise, as I tend to be very critical of these sorts of things. But I've been doing it for a little over a week now, and I'm slowly but surely noticing a better overall mood. You won't reap the benefits instantly. It takes time like many things. But at the very least, it's not harmful in any way. In best case scenarios, it'll help you foster a sense of gratitude and overall positivity. And I think that's much better than simply being free of illness. Illness has always been with us, and we've always sought out to cure it. And we've had pretty good success in that regard, all things considered. But we have to move past that and start focusing on matters of health, of mental health proper. If you were sufficiently mentally healthy, perhaps you could avoid unnecessary mental illness. Perhaps in troubling times, you would be resilient enough to withstand whatever life throws at you. Perhaps you'd begin to feel even better about the good things in your life. Don't just look to the removal of your pains and illnesses. Look to improve your strengths and well-being. Only then can we truly say we are mentally healthy.